Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest album from the Smashing Pumpkins entitled, and if you excuse me for a moment here as I read off the name of this album, Shiny and Oh So Bright Volume 1/LP, No Past, No Future, No Sun. Quite a mouthful there with this album title. Kind of funny considering the album itself runs a bit on the short side at only around 30 minutes in length, but yeah, that's the title for this album that we're going to be talking about here today, this new Smashing Pumpkins album. So I really wasn't sure what I was going to be getting into with this project, and after giving this thing a good few listens, I have to say that I think it's a pretty decent project overall. It didn't wow me or anything quite like that. I don't think this is one of the Smashing Pumpkins' best albums or anything quite like that, but I think it's a decent project for what it is. For the most part, I'd say the band is able to create some pretty solid songs here on this thing. All the performances, for the most part, across this project are pretty enjoyable. They're pretty solid. The overall sound of this project is also pretty consistent throughout its runtime. Overall, it's just a pretty decent project from front to back. I do feel like it starts off with probably the weakest song on the project, Knights of Malta, which is this track that I wouldn't say it's an awful song or anything quite like that, but I'm not a really big fan of some of the more echoey, manipulated vocals that are going on in the background here on this track. They just kind of stand out as being a bit awkward in my opinion, and they just don't sound all that great to me. And overall, just the overall vibe of the track just feels a bit awkward to me, and it's a bit of an odd way to start off the project in my opinion, and also, like I said, probably my least favorite track on here. And for that reason, I do feel like this album has a bit of a weak start to it overall. However, it does immediately pull a big recovery with the next track, Silvery Sometimes, which I feel like is overall probably one of my favorite songs on the album. It's just this pretty straightforward alternative rock cut on here. I feel like the performances on here are very nice. It's a pretty soothing, more laid back track, I guess you could say. I feel like the vocal performance on here is also pretty solid. It's just a very solid cut overall, and I rather enjoy it. And it really does do a good job of picking up the pace of the album again after the kind of weak opening track. And from here on out, many of the other cuts on the album kind of follow the similar pattern of being more, mid-tempo, alternative rock type tracks. You do have a few harder rocking songs mixed in there as well, like the track Marching On, for example, or the closing track Seek and You Shall Destroy. But for the most part, this thing feels more just like a more typical alternative rock type album. That's not to say that some of the more aggressive and hard rocking moments on this album aren't enjoyable. I quite like Marching On. I think it's a nice change of pace in the track listing. And the closing track, Seek and You Shall Destroy, on its own I think is a decent track as well. However, I don't really feel like it works all that nicely as a closing track to this album. It just kind of ends abruptly, and I just kind of expect more to come after it, and that doesn't happen. It feels like I finished listening to the first half of an album, and I'm about to go listen to the second half, except that there is no second half, really. Now, given the title of this album, and that it's a Volume 1, I'm guessing there's going to be a Volume 2, or even more volumes than that down the line, and maybe that's why this thing ends as abruptly as it does, because it's supposed to lead into something else, or something along those lines. Is maybe why this album is also rather on the short side of things at only around 30 minutes, as I said earlier. But I still feel like this album, even if there is going to be a volume 2 or more sequel albums, I feel like the individual albums making up the bigger series of albums should still have their own appropriate starts and endings, to really, kick things off and tie things together appropriately. You wouldn't go, say for example, you're gonna go watch a movie or something as part of a series of movies. You wouldn't expect, you'd expect each individual movie, even though it's part of a bigger series, and that maybe there's more coming later. You still expect each individual movie to have its own conclusion to it, tie up everything that happened in that individual movie. It's not like you got halfway through the movie and it just ends, and it's like you gotta wait another few years to find out what happens. That's kind of what this album feels like. It's like it's all going fine after that first track. It's all pretty solid, and then it just kind of cuts out and ends before it really has a chance to properly end itself. And like, as I said, maybe whenever we get a sequel to this thing, another album, a volume 2, whatever you want to call it, it will recontextualize part of this and give it a more proper ending. But I still feel like this thing on its own should have a more conclusive ending to it, or at least have some kind of track that sounds like it could be an ending, because this last track here, like I said, it's a decent song in its own right. I enjoy it. It just ends really abruptly, and I don't really feel like it does a good job of tying together a lot of what previously happened on the album. It just cuts off, really. So yeah, it's a decent song, just not a very good closer track in my opinion. And that just kind of leads to this album not only having a weak start, but also kind of a weak ending overall. But the middle is pretty decent, as I said before. A lot of the cuts on here can be catchy. They lots of times have a nice, more laid-back atmosphere to them, particularly tracks like Alienation or the previously mentioned Silvery Sometimes are some of my favorites here on this thing. It's a solid album overall, I would say. There's definitely stuff here in this project to enjoy if you're a fan of the Smashing Pumpkins. It's just, you know, maybe the weak start and ending here, as well as the fact that it feels a little incomplete at times, leads to this album feeling maybe a little bit underwhelming in the grand scheme of things. But it's still a decent project in my opinion. So yeah, the majority of this album is worth hearing to some extent, and sure, there are some moments on here that I feel like are a bit weaker, like the opening track, or maybe some tracks that don't stand out as much overall, like the track with Sympathy, for example. But I thought that one was a little bit more forgettable, I guess. But, you know, the majority of this project is worth checking out, in my opinion. And I am interested to see what will come of a possible Volume 2 or sequel album to this, whatever it's going to be. I'm interested in seeing what they have in store with that project. But yeah, I'd recommend this album to Smashing Pumpkins fans primarily, though I'm guessing you've probably already heard the project by this point. Or just, you know, rock fans in general. There's probably something on here you'll enjoy. But if you've never been a fan of this group or anything like that, I don't think this album is necessarily going to change your mind. But yeah, this is still a pretty solid album in my opinion. Not a fantastic, great album that blew me away or anything like that, but one that was still enjoyable for what it's worth. So yeah, that's just my own opinion on this album. Feel free to have your own, and in fact, feel free to leave your own opinion in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to this channel for more music-related content, things like album reviews, countdown list, track reviews, discussion videos, all that good stuff. So if you don't want to miss out on that, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching, and stay golden.